This morning I'm going to share a little story to make the point. And actually, when we send you out to check in, we also going to use stories. Stories are powerful when you work in complexity because they are real stories. Stories that are based on experience because they are not theory. They really blood, sweat, and tears that come through. So it's a powerful tool. So what we're going to do this morning is I'm going to train a little bit and share one story. And then we are going to do a little check-in slightly differently using a method called appreciative inquiry or inquiry, depending on where you're from. So the story I want to share is actually two questions that we started to work, my colleague and my husband, who is my partner, Took and me, we started to work on the European Commission in 2007. 2006 was the first time he visited. 2007 we started to get invited to do some kind of engagement process. One of the early invitations, the first invitation was the translation department, the second invitation was for the Joint Research Center, which I find very difficult to say, JRC. And it's the scientists of the European Union. It's the scientific policymakers, and scientists are very, is it left or right brain, I don't know, they're very analytical, really not really being used to participatory ways of working. But the reason why we got invited into this was because and the first invitation was on the director level. They had 6 geographical locations where they specialize in different scientific things. Karlsruhe has the nuclear physicists, and somebody else has food security, and somebody has about disease or whatever. And they give advice to policies for all of Europe. And the directors, like I said, they are located in physically different locations, and the headquarters is in Brussels. So they even have that challenge of working together. One is in Karlsruhe, one is in Istra in Italy, one is in Kiel, Netherlands, and so forth. And so they were facing pretty much the same problem you were facing, that the internal communication wasn't working optimally, and they needed to know how they can work more intelligently across silos, because they needed that to deliver what they needed to deliver. So these directors have meetings twice a year. There are about 80 of them, and the meetings tended to somebody a little lower in the hierarchy knew about this participatory way of working, and she was actually the one that was saying these meetings are not working, because they were PowerPoint presentations, and people were actually sitting at the back of the room doing the emails and their SMSs and so forth. And it's quite costly to fly in 80 directors from across Europe and also give them the per diems and whatever carpe diems that we get. So she suggested, talk to the HR director, said there's different way of working. So I'm not saying this because change sometimes happens, just trickles in somewhere in the corner of the organization. It's not always a mainframe decision. You are already far down the path. You are already completely introducing it into your organization. But I'm just continue the story. So finally she managed to convince the HR director that this might be an alternative. And he called us and very apologetically asked, would you be willing to come down to Brussels and just have a talk with us? No commitment, nothing, just a talk with us. And explain a little bit how this works. We'll pay your travel and we'll pay the fee and that's all. And we were actually quite pleased to do that. I have to say, my husband and I, we had reached a point where we were not trying to sell anybody anything, because it was more interesting for us to know, are the conditions in place that we can deliver? So we didn't try to convince them. We really wanted to have a meeting to together figure out, would this be something for them or not? And we had this meeting, and I think we found a rapport, and I think he had a good understanding of what this potential could do, but was very nervous in the culture that they had, was extremely hierarchical, to introduce a participatory way of working. So we went down, these kind of meetings, we had about 2 or 3. And in the process we proceeded, and we kind of managed to figure out, if we would do it, what would the focus be? And that was about the cross-silo cooperation. That was the crux. And then we got an okay. They said, we have a go, let's plan it, or we planned it, or we were ready. In the last minute, in 2007, the Director General got cold feet and said, no, we are going to do it as we used to. So there's fear of change. There's fear of losing your face or trying something, of course. So they did another meeting, and this was even worse than the previous ones. And this was the last straw. This convinced him, we need to do it. He said, I'm not going to do that one more time. So he was open. Now, they called us back again, very apologetically. Mr. Möller, would you be interested to do this again? He said, sure, let's talk again. And we did go down. And this time Toke said, I insist on meeting with the Director General. And this is kind of, this 4,000 people or something working at this time. We are company of 2 people. And not even the managers get a meeting with the Director General. Toke said, I insist, I want to have a meeting with the Director General so we can look at each other and see if this is the way we want to go. Based on our previous experience, everything was cancelled last night. So he got his meeting. And we had prepared a script and a description how we're going to work and all that, so sent that ahead of time, like good preparation. Took Mr. Schenker, who's the director, when Toke comes into the room with the HR director and somebody else, they greet, of course, and polite people and everything, and then Mr. Schenker says, Mr. Möller, I have read through the script and I don't understand anything. And Toke said, okay. And then he took a flip chart paper and he drew the chaos order control. And he said, this is a decision you have to do. You can stay with the status quo, and then you continue your meetings like you do, and you'll get more of the same. Or you'll have to take a risk and go a little bit into chaos with a little bit enough order to see if some newness can come. And he's a scientist, a physical, what's it called? Anyway, it's a physicist, neurophysicist. He knows that the interesting thing happens between chaos and order. In science, that's where the newness comes from. So he said, Mr. Möller, I'm taking a risk, but I know we need to go there. And he pointed at the place. And then Toke said, Mr. Schenker, I'm willing to take the risk with you, but I'm not willing to take the risk for you. This was a very significant moment in the story because they became partners. And we were not the scapegoat if it would go wrong. He was invested, and we needed his investment to really know that we could create success. His commitment to try this was invaluable for us because when people came into the room and saw our visual landscape and saw the cafe set up, you could see what was going on in their heads. And I mean, that's where you need to be calm because that's where you need to know that this works because you've tried it so many times. So they sat down and we actually started. And it was invaluable because his Director General, he was completely participating and signaling that he wants this. Oh, actually, we started with a normal bank dinner in the evening with a little easy cafe or a bank of tables together. Easy, but then we started with we actually started with an appreciative input, and I'll come back to that later. And then we went into a cafe. Then we actually did a mind map and voted and did work groups and stuff. So you can design the process to fit the context. But then they kept calling us back. So the next layer was we worked with the action leaders, which were the project managers, and then the directors again and stuff. In the first meeting, about 1/3 into the meeting, we had people convinced. And that was when we had, after the cafe did a collective mind map electronically and voted on the issues. 5 strategic areas surfaced very, very clearly. And one of them was that they needed to change their recruitment procedure because they couldn't get the best scientists on board. And one was that they needed a long-term vision and strategy because they too had rotating leadership and stuff, and somehow they didn't, that unifying thing that you also talked about, they needed that. And there were 3 other things, but those 2 things were actually set in motion. So you could say the first meeting produced a clarity. We saw together, and it's powerful when 80 people see the 2 together. They knew they needed to do this, and they set these 2 projects in motion, and a few months later, they then had managed to change the recruitment procedure, and managed to have a long-term vision. That is from seeing something to come to a result. Now when you implement the result, maybe half a year later you can measure the impact. What's the actual impact of doing this? And this is part of thinking also, if you want to show credibility, to thinking it into your plan. Now, when they kept calling us back and back, and we thought we can't keep waiting for them our rest of our lives, and this is not rocket science. I mean, we didn't mind having the job, but we also wanted to do other things, and we thought this is not rocket science. How could we ask the question, how can we make this sustainable for this organization, a huge organization? And of course, what we had done was only pockets. It wasn't visible in the rest of the organization. So we really were in the inquiry together with them, how can this be made sustainable? And we discovered few things about come to the point. We discovered there were three cornerstones, three wheels we could push on. And for me, this is still a hypothesis, but it seems to work so far. I haven't seen. One was from the story I told, one was very clear for us. For this to succeed in a big organization like this, you need the mandate, you need the support of the top. Because a CEO or DG can come at any time and say, we're not doing this anymore. That can happen, and that's part of the reality working in a hierarchy organization. So we needed the mandate. We knew that was one of the cornerstones. We learned it the kind of the real way. And then we also saw that the first meeting that we did, of course, we had one shot in, kind of, I don't know to say that, we had one shot in the barrel, and we just had to score. So we wanted to do that meeting. We knew we could produce something, but we also needed to create the conditions to produce, and part of that was the mandate. So one was to show that this works, demonstrate results. Somebody said the easy win. Someone talked about the easy win. Do a really good meeting, show that this can produce results, and you're building a lot of trust, and that trust can take it further. So demonstrate results, I call that. But it's actually go and do this work and show that it works. And then the last part was to make it sustainable, build competence, capacity inside the organization to keep doing this. So we did some internal trainings in the organization so that they could do their own stuff. And very quickly we actually started to do their own stuff. Build capacity or competence. And then we realized after this time, of course the purpose is always in the middle. There's a clarity of purpose. We have this saying that collective clarity of the purpose is the invisible leader in this context. Collective clarity of purpose is the invisible leader. Everybody knows what we are doing. It's easy to align. So what we then discovered that these were like gateways in. In some cases, we came in this way. In some cases, we were called from the top, invited from the top. Here it was maybe closed. In some cases, people from the organization go to a training and they bring it in this way. But we realized that to do that could be a way to notice all these three corners could be a way to create some kind of sustainability. I'm almost finished. The interesting thing was that 2 years later, Mr. Schenker finally retired. He was in his 60s and he retired. And the next Director General didn't want anything. He wasn't interested in this participatory stuff. But there was enough. I kept coming back to the Commission and doing open trainings for other departments as well. And the interesting thing, there was always somebody from the JRC in the trainings. So in the small pockets elsewhere, because they had had enough exposure and there was enough competence in the organization. It was still alive, and it was quite encouraging actually to see, because I knew that DG wasn't interested. Now that GG is gone, and I knew somebody who's more favorable about participation is back again. But the interesting thing is that there can be enough DNA in the culture that the culture actually can move on and move on. So that was my story about the JRC. That change sometimes doesn't happen in a very planned mainframe way. Sometimes it just sneaks in and becomes a little viral, and that's how it happens. Okay.
And Monica, is there anything about this model that you think applies just on the level of like running? You know, are these things people need to be thinking about as they go back and implement? Is it? Do you know what I mean? Like if I'm going out and I'm going to go and engage my staff around a particular issue, how would these three things influence how I might do that, for example?
One thing is to work in your sphere of influence, or get the mandate. That's of course wherever you are in the organization.
Right. So either have the mandate or get the mandate. If you're hosting a conversation or a meeting, have the mandate to host it, or get the mandate to support the outcome. Great.
That would be my recommendation. And then I think the rest is self-evident. Do a good job.
Yeah, do a good job. Get results, right? Yeah.
Over what period of time did all of this happen?
This initial thing was like 2 years or something like that.
Just to kind of get it up and running and meetings and
and build enough capacity inside the organization. We did 2 or 3 trainings inside, and some people catch on and they will carry it on. They do it also with member states, so it's even a place outside. And when it gets enough credence, and all that, that's the credibility, then it gets momentum. It starts to get momentum. So in the last trainings, from all I haven't had anything to do with it. I just keep coming and learning and doing. So it's almost self-sustained. But the interesting thing was with Phil Castle, some of you met. He has changed his organization to be a very participatory organization. It's been that for many years. But just recently when we worked together in Austria, he said to me that now I think it will reach the place where if I left, it would still go in that organization. And that's taken 10 years, maybe less, about 8 years for him. So it is a little bit dependent on the people that are there, but it can still become sustainable to some degree. I don't know. Did you have any comments?
I was just going to say, like, in our context, one thing is to keep in mind in looking at this model is that since one of our first things up is really the collaboration teams, or whatever language we're using to call those, that using this model in how those run, and I don't think it's been decided yet who's going to lead those teams. So if it turns out that the leadership is coming, not necessarily from somebody who's in this room, but from maybe a staff member on some of those teams, then there would maybe need to be some capacity building for those folks as well. So if you're like a team leader of a collaboration team, we want to see this being like the models being used in that. Then that piece would might be missing for them. So we might just think about how we can share what we've learned.
And one way we do it quite often, not always in trainings, but sometimes we take what we call apprentices. Somebody who's like with us when we do something and they learn by doing stuff like that. So you have sometimes we have a big team.
Monica was saying to me over breakfast today, she was like, for your November thing, we're doing this 1-day thing in November when we all come back together. She was like, you should have a team from this group deliver that day, and they should work with you in the design and delivery of it. So that so as we move forward from this point, everything we're doing is building capacity, because that's what creates the resilience to survive things like change in leadership at whatever level in this structure. Because it's like when something gets embedded at a cultural level, then that's how it survives. That's how you survive change. It's the quality of relationships you have.
And I think the delivery of this is participatory too, because when we planned the first meeting with the directors, it was participatory. We had the directors on board to give us input, and the same with the action leaders. And the action leaders are really action-oriented. I mean, the name is very appropriate. They need to deliver. And to have them on board in designing the process and sharpening the questions was invaluable. So it was a co-created thing, and they took co-ownership and co-responsibility for it, and that is part of the success, I think. One of the guys there was actually became the driver of the changing the recruitment procedure. He was really concerned about it. So it's participatory the whole way through,